What happens when beloved British actor Tony Robinson sits down with talk show icon Graham Norton to discuss his career and activism, only for the conversation to explode into accusations about class betrayal, political grandstanding, and the responsibilities of public figures? It only took 25 seconds for decades of friendship to shatter in one of the most shocking confrontations British television has ever witnessed. Before we dive into this absolutely stunning moment, make sure you subscribe to our channel. We bring you daily videos exposing Hollywood's darkest scandals, the confrontations the industry doesn't want you to see, and the explosive moments that reveal what really happens when cameras capture unfiltered truth. Last night, on The Graham Norton Show, what was supposed to be a warm reunion between two beloved figures of British entertainment turned into an absolute disaster that left viewers across the nation stunned and talking about nothing else. Tony Robinson, the actor and activist known for playing the lovable Baldric in the classic comedy series Blackadder, and his tireless work with historical documentaries and political causes, found himself in an increasingly hostile and personal exchange with host Graham Norton that went from friendly banter to bitter accusations in mere minutes. What started as what should have been a straightforward discussion about Robinson's latest documentary project exploring forgotten working-class history quickly spiraled into a heated and deeply uncomfortable argument about wealth, privilege, working-class authenticity, and whether celebrities who become wealthy through their work can still legitimately claim to represent ordinary people and speak on their behalf. Tony Robinson arrived at the studio that evening in his typical casual style, wearing comfortable, unpretentious clothes that reflected his down-to-earth personality and his lifelong connection to his working-class roots in London. He greeted Graham warmly. With a big hug and friendly jokes, the two clearly having known each other for years through various industry events, award ceremonies, and social circles in the tight-knit British entertainment world. The audience gave him an enthusiastic and affectionate reception, applauding warmly for someone who had entertained them for decades through his comedy work, and who many also associated with serious, thoughtful historical programming that brought forgotten stories to light. Graham, always the gracious and welcoming host, welcomed Tony with genuine affection that seemed completely sincere, and immediately began asking about his latest documentary series exploring working-class history in Britain, about the stories of ordinary people who had shaped the nation through their labor and sacrifice, but were often forgotten or ignored by mainstream historical narratives that focused on kings, queens, and wealthy individuals. The conversation began in a friendly, engaging manner, with Robinson sharing passionate and articulate insights about the critical importance of telling working-class stories, about how history had been written primarily by and about the wealthy and powerful for centuries, systematically leaving out the experiences and contributions of the vast majority of people who actually built the country through their hard labor and sacrifice. He talked enthusiastically about the extensive research he'd done for the documentary, the dozens of people he'd interviewed in communities across Britain, the dusty archives he'd explored to uncover these forgotten narratives that deserved to be told. He spoke movingly about visiting former mining communities in Wales and northern England, textile factory towns in Lancashire, shipbuilding cities like Glasgow and Newcastle, and hearing powerful stories from families whose ancestors had worked themselves literally to exhaustion for poverty wages that barely kept them alive. Graham asked thoughtful, probing questions, appearing genuinely interested in the subject matter and engaged with Robinson's passion, and the audience seemed captivated and moved by Robinson's obvious dedication to the topic and the emotion in his voice when describing what he'd learned. Robinson discussed his own background at length, growing up in a working-class family in Homerton, East London, understanding from a very young age what it meant to struggle financially, to constantly worry about bills and rent, to see his parents work multiple jobs simultaneously, just to keep the family afloat and food on the table. He talked about how that background had profoundly shaped his entire worldview, his politics, his choice of roles throughout his acting career, and his unwavering commitment to using whatever platform he'd gained through his success to speak for people who didn't have platforms of their own. The energy in the studio was genuinely warm and supportive, with the audience clearly appreciating his sincerity and his dedication to these causes over many decades, never wavering even when it might have been easier or more profitable to stay quiet. But then Graham asked a question that seemed innocuous enough on the surface, but would prove to be the catalyst for everything that followed, the spark that ignited a conflagration neither man seemed prepared to control. He leaned back in his chair with a slight smile that didn't quite reach his eyes and said, "Tony, I have to ask, and please don't take this the wrong way because I have enormous respect for your work, but you talk very passionately about representing the working class and telling their stories, about being a voice for people who don't have voices. But you've been very successful over the years. You've made quite a lot of money from your acting career and your documentary work. You live in a rather nice house in Hampstead, which is one of the wealthiest areas of London. You send your children to good schools. At what point does someone stop being working class? Can you still legitimately claim to represent working people when you're now part of the wealthy elite yourself, living a completely different life from the people you claim to speak for?" The question hung in the air for a long moment, the atmosphere in the studio shifting noticeably from warm to considerably cooler. Robinson's expression shifted from open and friendly to noticeably more guarded and defensive, his smile fading. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, clearly not expecting this line of questioning, before responding carefully. "Well, Graham, I think your class background isn't simply erased by financial success later in life. I grew up working class. I understand those experiences and struggles intimately from living them, and that never leaves you. Those formative experiences shape who you are forever. Yes, I've been fortunate in my career, incredibly fortunate, but I've never forgotten where I came from or what it was like. I've consistently used my success to amplify working class voices and stories that otherwise wouldn't be heard. That's not hypocrisy, that's using privilege responsibly." Graham nodded slowly, but there was something deliberate in his expression that suggested he wasn't satisfied with that answer at all and intended to push further. "But don't you think there's something a bit, I don't know, contradictory about being a millionaire who lectures people about class inequality and the evils of capitalism? I mean this in the kindest way possible. But you talk about representing ordinary people, but you haven't been ordinary for decades now. You live a completely different life from the people you claim to speak for. You have financial security they could never dream of. You don't worry about paying rent or feeding your children or losing your job. When you speak out about class issues from that position of enormous wealth and comfort, doesn't it sometimes come across as out of touch or performative, people who are actually struggling with these issues in their daily lives?" The audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats, sensing that this had moved beyond friendly conversation into something more confrontational and uncomfortable. This wasn't the usual warm, supportive atmosphere they associated with Graham's show. Robinson's jaw tightened visibly, and you could see the muscles in his face tensing. "Performative? That's quite an accusation, Graham. I've been involved in left-wing politics and working-class advocacy since before I was famous, since I was a teenager. This isn't something I took up for publicity or to boost my profile. I genuinely believe in these causes with every fiber of my being, and suggesting that having money somehow disqualifies me from caring about inequality or speaking about it is a ridiculous argument specifically designed to silence anyone who speaks up from any position. It's a catch-22 that benefits no one except those who want to maintain the status quo." Graham's tone became noticeably sharper, more pointed, less friendly. "I'm not trying to silence you, Tony. Please don't mischaracterize what I'm saying. I'm asking whether there's a fundamental contradiction in your position that you need to acknowledge. You criticize capitalism and wealth inequality very publicly, while being wealthy yourself and benefiting enormously from the capitalist system. You talk eloquently about the struggles of working people while living in comfort and luxury they could never afford no matter how hard they worked. How do you personally reconcile that apparent contradiction? How do you square those two things in your own mind? Robinson leaned forward intensely, his voice rising with frustration and anger. So what should I do, Graham? What would satisfy you? Should I give away all my money to prove I'm authentic? Live in poverty to maintain some kind of working class credibility that you'd find acceptable? That's absurd. That's completely absurd. The point is to use whatever resources and platform you have to fight for a more just society, not to perform poverty for people's approval. I pay my taxes willingly. I support policies that would significantly increase my own taxes. I donate substantial amounts to causes I believe in. I use my platform to advocate for change. What more do you want from me? I want honesty, Graham said firmly. I want you to acknowledge that you're not working class anymore, that you're speaking from a position of privilege, and that maybe your perspective isn't as representative of ordinary people as you think it is. The tension in the studio was now impossible to ignore, thick enough to cut with a knife. Robinson's face flushed with growing anger, his hands gesturing emphatically. You know what I think this is really about, Graham? I think you're fundamentally uncomfortable with celebrities who take strong political stands on anything controversial. You prefer us to just entertain people and stay quiet about serious issues, to keep things light and fun and unchallenging. Well, I'm sorry, but I can't do that. I won't do that. Some of us actually have principles that matter more than being universally liked or keeping our careers safe. Graham's expression hardened noticeably, his friendly demeanor dropping away entirely. Don't you dare question my principles, Tony. Don't you dare. I've supported plenty of political causes myself over the years, causes that mattered to me personally and causes that affected others. But I don't pretend to be something I'm not. I don't claim to represent working people while living in a mansion in one of London's wealthiest neighborhoods. There's a significant difference between supporting causes you believe in and appropriating an identity you no longer actually belong to. Appropriating? Robinson's voice hit a new level of anger, loud enough that everyone in the studio could hear the fury. I'm appropriating my own background? My own lived experience? That's offensive, Graham. That's genuinely offensive and insulting. You can't appropriate your own identity. I was working class. I grew up in genuine poverty. Those experiences fundamentally shaped who I am as a person. And no amount of money changes that core part of my identity or erases those formative years that made me who I am today. But it absolutely does change your material circumstances dramatically, Graham pressed, relentlessly. It changes what you currently understand about the daily reality of working-class life in Britain today. You haven't had to worry about bills or rent or feeding your family in decades, Tony. Literally, decades. You're speaking from memory, from nostalgia about the past, not from current lived experience of what working people face right now. There's a fundamental difference there that you seem unwilling or unable to acknowledge. Robinson stood up abruptly, the sudden movement making several audience members visibly jump in their seats. His face was bright red with fury, his entire body radiating anger. This is unbelievable. This is absolutely unbelievable. You invited me here, ostensibly to talk about my documentary, about important historical work that gives voice to forgotten people, and instead you're using it as an opportunity to systematically attack my credentials and my integrity and my right to speak. This is ambush television, Graham. This is exactly what I'd expect from a tabloid show, not from you. Graham remained seated, but his voice was absolutely firm and unyielding. It's not an ambush to ask difficult questions, Tony. You've built a very public persona around being a working-class champion, a voice for the voiceless. Surely you can handle some legitimate scrutiny of that claim? If your position is solid, you should be able to defend it. Scrutiny? Robinson's voice was loud enough and sharp enough that the entire studio could hear every furious word crystal clear. You're not offering legitimate scrutiny. You're making accusations. You're suggesting I'm a fraud, that my activism is fake and performative, that I have no right whatsoever to speak about class issues because I've been successful in my career? That's not scrutiny, Graham. That's a character assassination conducted on live television in front of an audience. I'm suggesting you might not be the authentic voice of working people that you consistently present yourself as being, Graham said with icy coolness. There's a significant difference between those two things. Robinson laughed bitterly, a harsh sound that echoed through the silent studio. You want to talk about authenticity, Graham? Let's talk about you and your career. You've made an absolute fortune being cheeky and non-threatening, never challenging anything too seriously or risking anything, keeping everything perpetually light and fun and safe for advertisers. You've built your entire career on being safe, on never rocking the boat or making anyone genuinely uncomfortable. And now you're attacking me because I actually stand for something beyond mere entertainment? Because I actually take risks for things I believe in? The audience gasped audibly, a collective sharp intake of breath. Graham's face flushed visibly, turning an angry red. That's completely out of line, Tony. Completely and utterly out of line. I've used my platform consistently to support LGBTQ rights, to speak out courageously on issues I care deeply about, issues that have affected me personally throughout my life. Just because I don't grandstand about it constantly or make it the centerpiece of every appearance doesn't mean I don't have genuine principles and convictions. LGBTQ rights? Robinson's voice dripped with unconcealed scorn and contempt. Issues that directly affect you personally? How incredibly brave of you. Meanwhile, you attack people like me, who fight for causes that don't personally benefit them at all. You're basically proving my exact point about the difference between self-interested activism and genuine solidarity. Graham stood up now as well, his voice rising dramatically to match Robinson's volume. How dare you? How absolutely dare you come on my show and suggest that my activism is somehow less valid or less principled because it affects me personally? That's disgraceful, Tony. That's absolutely disgraceful, and you know it. Fighting for your own rights and fighting for others' rights are both legitimate forms of activism. And it's equally disgraceful for you to suggest that my class background is invalid or appropriated, because I've been successful in my career. Robinson shot back immediately, not giving an inch. But you started this, Graham. You fired the first shot in this exchange. Don't act surprised that I'm firing back. I asked a legitimate question, Graham insisted, his voice shaking with anger. A question that many people have about wealthy celebrities claim to represent working people. If you can't handle that question without having a meltdown, maybe you shouldn't be positioning yourself as a political figure. A meltdown? Robinson's voice hit a new pitch. I'm defending myself against your baseless attacks. You've questioned my authenticity, my motivations, my right to speak about my own experiences. And when I push back, you call it a meltdown. That's classic bad faith arguing, Graham. The other guests who had been on the couch had at some point moved away, creating distance from the confrontation. The studio crew looked uncertain, clearly receiving conflicting signals about whether to intervene. You're twisting everything, Graham said through clenched teeth. I asked whether there was a contradiction in your position. You've turned it into a personal attack on me, questioning my career, my activism, my principles. You're the one arguing in bad faith. Because you started with an attack disguised as a question, Robinson countered. You know exactly what you were doing. You wanted to make me look like a hypocrite, like some champagne socialist who has no right to speak about class issues. Well, I'm not going to sit here and let you do that unchallenged. Graham's voice went cold. I think you should leave my show. Oh, I'm leaving, Robinson said, already reaching for his jacket. Don't worry about that. I wouldn't stay on this couch another second. I thought you were better than this, Graham. I really did. But you're just another comfortable celebrity who's more threatened by real political commitment than supportive of it. Get out, Graham said firmly. You can't insult me on my own show and expect to stay. I'm already gone, Robinson said, standing fully now. He looked at the audience. I apologize that you had to witness this. You came for entertainment and got an argument instead. But sometimes principles matter more than being polite. He turned back to Graham one last time. You know what the real tragedy is here? We should be allies, Graham. We both came from nothing. We both made it in this industry. We both have platforms we could use for good. But you've chosen comfort over conviction. You'd rather attack people who take stands than take stands yourself. That's your choice. But don't expect me to respect it. The only tragedy here is watching you reveal yourself as sanctimonious and self-righteous, Graham said with cold fury in his voice. You can't handle the slightest challenge to your carefully constructed image as the people's champion, as the authentic voice of the working class. That tells me absolutely everything I need to know about how authentic you really are deep down. Robinson shook his head in visible disgust, his hands trembling with anger. I've spent literally decades fighting for causes I believe in, Graham. Decades of consistent work, long before it was fashionable to do so, long before it could possibly benefit my career or my public image. I've put my money where my mouth is repeatedly. I've faced criticism and backlash from powerful people. I've never wavered once in my commitment to working people and social justice. But sure, one critical question from you has somehow revealed the complete truth about me. The arrogance is absolutely staggering. The arrogance is you thinking your success hasn't changed you, Graham shot back. That you're still the same working-class kid from London despite decades of wealth and privilege. That's the real self-deception here. Robinson grabbed his bag from beside the couch, his hands visibly shaking with barely controlled anger and emotion. You fundamentally don't understand class, Graham. You really don't. You think it's just about money, about how much you earn or where you live. It's not. It's about values. It's about solidarity. It's about whose side you're on when it actually matters, when there are real consequences. And right now, at this moment, you've made it crystal clear whose side you're on. The comfortable, the unchallenging, the safe. That's your choice to make, but don't expect me to respect it. And you've made it abundantly clear you can't handle honest conversation, Graham said sharply. You want everyone to applaud your activism without ever questioning it or examining it critically. Well, the real world doesn't work that way, Tony. Real activism withstands scrutiny. This wasn't honest conversation, Robinson said, already walking toward the exit with determined steps. This was an ambush specifically designed to undermine my work and my credibility. But you know what? It won't work. People who actually care about these issues will see right through this performance. As he reached the studio doors, Graham called after him with one final attempt at having the last word. Running away when challenged. Very principled of you, Tony. Robinson stopped dead in his tracks and turned back, his voice shaking visibly with emotion and barely controlled rage. I'm not running away, Graham. I'm refusing to participate in my own character assassination on live television. There's a significant difference. I came here in good faith to discuss important historical work that matters. You turned it into a personal attack on my integrity and my authenticity. I won't dignify that with further participation. You turned it into an attack by being unable to answer a simple question, Graham countered. It wasn't a simple question. It was an accusation, Robinson said. And you know it. But fine, you got your viral moment. You got your controversy. I hope it was worth destroying a friendship and revealing your true priorities. With that, he pushed through the studio doors with considerable force. They swung shut behind him with a heavy thud that seemed to reverberate through every corner of the silent studio, echoing like a period at the end of a devastating sentence. For a long, uncomfortable moment, nobody moved at all. Graham stood on his stage, looking somewhat shaken, his face still flushed with emotion, his chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. The audience sat in absolute silence, completely stunned, many looking genuinely distressed and upset by what they'd witnessed, the friendly atmosphere they'd expected completely shattered. Finally, Graham addressed the camera. his voice strained and noticeably shaky. "Well, that was unexpected. We'll take a quick break." But everyone in that studio knew this wasn't something that could be smoothed over with a commercial break and moving on to the next segment. What was supposed to be a friendly chat about history and activism had exploded into a bitter confrontation about class, authenticity, wealth, and the right to speak on political issues. Tony Robinson had been told to leave the Graham Norton show after an argument that had exposed deep divisions about what it means to maintain working-class identity after achieving success and wealth. And as the cameras cut away, the weight of what had just happened hung heavy and oppressive in the air, leaving everyone who witnessed it shaken and uncertain about what they'd just seen unfold before their eyes.